My name is Avery Warren. I'm 32 years old and live in Boston, about 10 blocks from the waterfront. Every morning, I walk to my office with a cup of black coffee in one hand and a head full of priorities I'll probably never get through in one day. I'm the co-founder of a biotech firm, Helion Biotech. It's a job that often intimidates people more than it impresses them, mostly because no one really knows what it means unless they're in the field. But none of that ever mattered to my family. To them, I was always just the quiet one, the one who dressed in neutrals, barely wore makeup, and never brought a date to Thanksgiving. They never asked why I stayed up past midnight reviewing grant proposals or why my phone was always buzzing with clinical trial updates. That just wasn't the kind of success they knew how to understand. Emma, my younger sister by 3 years, was the golden child. Pretty, charming, easy to talk to. The kind of person who makes you feel like you've known her forever after 5 minutes. She wasn't mean, at least not in the obvious way, but she had a way of making you feel like you were a supporting character in a life that revolved around her. And maybe I was, for a while. At family dinners, the attention always drifted her way. Emma, your dress is gorgeous. Emma, that hairstyle looks so elegant on you. Emma, your new boyfriend is a financial consultant? Wow. And then there was me, quietly sipping my wine and pretending not to notice the way people's eyes glazed over when someone asked what I did. I used to think it didn't bother me. I told myself it was fine, I didn't need validation. But deep down, I always hoped that maybe one day they'd be proud. That maybe when I hit a certain milestone or my name appeared in a press release, they'd call. They never did. It had been 2.5 years since I'd been to any family event. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because the silence had grown so natural, it almost felt polite. I sent flowers on birthdays, responded to texts when I could, and wired money when my parents hinted at minor emergencies. $500 here, $800 here. Quiet help, no questions asked. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from my mom. Emma's getting married this spring. Isn't that exciting? Hope you're doing well. No invitation. No, we'd love for you to be there. Just a vague announcement, like a press release I happened to be on the CC line for. I stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, just hollow. I scrolled up through the thread. The last message from her before this was nearly 5 months ago, a request for help with a plumbing bill. No check-ins, no how are yous, just transactions and silence. I didn't reply right away. A few days later, my dad called. I almost didn't pick up. When I finally did, he got straight to the point. Avery, about Emma's wedding. I think it's best you don't come. There's already a lot of people attending, and you know how Emma gets overwhelmed. We don't want any tension. Tension? I asked. My voice didn't rise, didn't crack, just a question. He hesitated, then added, Emma's fiancé comes from a really polished family. We don't want any awkward moments or misunderstandings. You know how your job can be. Hard to explain. That part broke something. Hard to explain. As if being a CEO, managing dozens of employees and steering life-saving research was less presentable than being a social media strategist or a boutique manager titles Emma's friends often had, as if my presence might embarrass them somehow. I didn't argue. I just said, okay, and hung up. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, sipping tea and staring at the city skyline. I didn't cry. I just felt the quiet realization sink in. I wasn't part of this family, not really. I was tolerated when convenient, erased when not. And now, apparently, I wasn't welcome at my sister's wedding. That night, after the call with my dad, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was angry, though, maybe I should have been, but because I kept replaying the words over and over. Your job is hard to explain. We don't want any tension. You know how Emma gets. The implication was clear. I was the problem. Not for anything I'd done, but for simply existing in a way that didn't fit into the narrative they liked to present. Emma was the bride. Emma was graceful, photogenic, social. I was the one who made things awkward by being too. What? Successful? Quiet? Not easy to label? I'd always told myself it didn't matter. That family didn't owe you constant praise, just quiet presence. But the older I got, the more I realized that presence without respect wasn't love, it was convenience. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my banking dashboard. I scrolled through my recurring payments: mom and dad's utilities, their cable and internet, a credit card I'd been paying off for them quietly since dad's minor heart surgery. I had taken over most of it gradually, one small emergency at a time. First, it was just their electricity, just for a few months. Then water. Then the internet bill when Emma moved back in temporarily and needed Wi-Fi for work. The total now sat at over $14,000 across 2 years. Not once had they asked if I was okay handling it. Not once had they said thank you. It was just assumed I'd do it, because I always did. I hovered my cursor over each scheduled payment. Cancel. Confirm. Cancel. Confirm. Each click felt like a stitch being pulled loose from a quilt I'd wrapped around myself for years, something I'd mistaken for comfort when it was really just obligation. I didn't send a message. Didn't warn them. Didn't explain. I just stopped. A few days later, my mom texted, "Internet's down again. Could you check with the provider? I think the card might have expired." I read it while waiting for a meeting to start. I didn't respond. That weekend, a new message popped up from Emma. No greeting, no context. "Can you help cover the photo booth rental? Dad says the venue's asking for full payment up front." I stared at it. So I wasn't good enough to attend the wedding, but I was still good enough to fund it? I closed the message without replying. The next morning, I walked into the Helion Biotech office and found a stack of resumes waiting on my desk. We were expanding new lab, new positions, new financial lead for the East Coast division. I flipped through them quickly, looking for standout experience. And then I paused. Daniel Raymond, MBA Corporate Finance Lead. Recent transfer from a boutique consulting firm. I squinted. That name. Emma had mentioned it in passing weeks ago during a family group chat I never responded to. Danny just got offered a new opportunity in Boston. We're moving soon. I opened his file fully. Sure enough, same LinkedIn photo Emma had once shared in a story. Tall, polished, charming smile. The kind of guy my parents would absolutely adore on site. He had applied for a position at Helion. I let out a quiet laugh. Not spiteful, just surprised. I doubted he had any idea who I was beyond Emma's older sister, and I was almost certain no one had ever mentioned what I actually did for a living. Well, he was about to find out. Monday morning arrived with a soft drizzle coating the sidewalks of Boston. From my office window, the skyline looked like a faded watercolor. Fog hung low, blurring the outlines of everything, just like the last few weeks had blurred the outlines of what counted as family. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at my desk, reviewing the day's schedule. 10:00 a.m. Final interview. Finance director candidate, Daniel Raymond. Right on time. He arrived 5 minutes early. Polished suit, leather portfolio in hand. He looked like a man used to being taken seriously. Confident. Smooth. He gave his name at the front desk without a flicker of doubt. His brow furrowed, then lifted in recognition. "Avery?" he asked, his voice unsure, caught somewhere between greeting and confusion. I nodded calmly. "Please, have a seat." He blinked. You work here?" "I do." I folded my hands on the desk. "I'm the director of strategic operations. I oversee all new hires for executive finance roles." I let that sit for a second. "And co-founder of the company." The shift in his face was subtle, but unmistakable. Not panic, just realization, like watching a man realize he's walked into a meeting without reading the full memo. To his credit, Daniel regrouped quickly. He sat up straighter, opened his portfolio, and launched into his pitch. Work experience, team leadership, ROI stats. He was well-spoken, professional, everything his resume promised, and I let him speak. I asked thoughtful questions, took notes, never once mentioned Emma, never once let the conversation drift toward personal terrain. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to embarrass him. I wasn't here to prove a point. But I also wasn't here to hide. By the time the interview ended, he looked composed on the outside, but I could tell his thoughts were racing. As he stood, he paused, glancing once more at me like he still couldn't fully believe what had just happened. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly. "I didn't know." I gave him a polite, neutral smile. Most people don't. Until they do. He left the room with more hesitation than he came in with. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the door after it closed. Not triumphant, not bitter, just still. It was never about making anyone feel small. It was about no longer pretending I was. Later that afternoon, I received a short email from HR candidate notes qualified. Excellent communication. Awaiting leadership approval. I hit reply, typed 2 words, approved, proceed. And that was it. I wasn't waiting for karma. I wasn't seeking closure. But I knew deep down that the next chapter had already started writing itself. By Friday, Daniel had officially accepted the offer. Starting date, the following Monday. Location, Helion Biotech. Boston HQ, Direct Supervisor, Avery Warren. My name. It sat right there in bold, on every internal document, every onboarding email, every welcome packet. There was no hiding it. Not anymore. I didn't think much of it as I reviewed the new employee orientation schedule. To me, it was just another addition to the team, another person I'd hold to the same standards as everyone else. No special treatment, no personal detours, but I knew the ripple effect was coming. I didn't have to wait long. That Saturday, I got a text from my mom. It was a photo, Emma in a white satin dress at a bridal fitting. Her caption read, "She looks like a dream, doesn't she?" I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another text came in. Daniel starts his new job next week. Big step for both of them. It's at some tech company. Very fancy name. Helios something? Helion. She didn't even realize. Emma's over the moon. He said his new boss is a woman, which I love. It'll be good for him to learn from strong women in leadership. Not that he needs any help. He's already doing great. I could almost hear her smiling through the words, as if that made it all the more impressive. As if Daniel's success was automatically Emma's. As if mine had never existed. I still didn't reply. That evening, I scrolled through social media. Emma had posted a boomerang of her twirling in the dress shop, champagne glass in hand. Caption, future Miss S. Raymond hashtags, hashtag bride vibes, hashtag boss babe, hashtag finance fiancé. The irony nearly made me laugh. That night, as I closed my laptop, I felt a strange stillness. Not tension, not dread, just stillness. Like the pause between lightning and thunder. I didn't have to say anything. The truth was already moving, quiet, unstoppable. Monday, Daniel's first official day. I arrived early, as always. The office was already humming with energy, new interns being shown around, coffee machines working overtime, fluorescent bulbs flickering slightly before waking up fully. At 9:15 sharp, I stepped into the third-floor conference room for the leadership briefing. Daniel was already there, seated at the far end of the table. When I walked in, he stood. "Good morning," he said, voice calm, but careful. I nodded. "Welcome aboard." I could see the calculation behind his eyes. A man measuring every word, wondering how much I knew, how much I'd tell, how long he could pretend this was normal. But I didn't mention Emma, didn't reference the wedding, didn't ask if he told anyone who he reported to now, because I already knew he hadn't, and I didn't need to. The truth has a way of slipping through even the smallest cracks, especially when someone's built their whole identity on appearances. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Leah. "Hey, random question. Are you really the co-founder of Helion Biotech?" Emma's fiancé just started working there. Thought it was a coincidence, but I stared at the screen, then typed slowly, "Not a coincidence." No follow-up. 20 minutes later, Emma's name lit up my screen. Incoming call. I let it ring, then silenced it. A text came in right after. "Is this some kind of joke?" Another one, seconds later, "You knew. You let him apply. You didn't say anything, and then he found out today. He came home pale. You humiliated him." I stared at the messages. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even smug. I was just tired. For years, I had let them narrate who I was, the quiet sister, the weird one, the one who didn't quite fit in. And now, the moment they finally saw me for who I really was, they called it humiliation. Emma's texts didn't stop that night. "You could have warned me. He's questioning everything now. Do you think this is funny? Some twisted revenge?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because silence was finally serving me better than words ever had. That Tuesday, Daniel avoided me. Not in an obvious way. He still showed up to meetings, gave status updates, held eye contact when needed, but there was a quiet stiffness in his presence now. The way people act when they realize the version of reality they'd been sold wasn't quite the truth. I didn't engage, didn't test boundaries, didn't do anything but let things play out. By Wednesday, the family group chat was lit up with messages. Aunt Sylvia asked if the rumor was true. Uncle Thomas congratulated me, which honestly surprised me. My mother, however, stayed silent. Until that evening, why didn't you tell us? She wrote. We would have been proud. It was the kind of sentence that sounds sweet if you read it quickly. But I read it slowly. We would have been proud. Not we are proud. Not we're sorry we dismissed you for years. Just a conditional statement, loaded with hindsight and a tone of you should have made it easier for us to see you. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the balcony, and let the night air carry off what was left of my need for their approval. By Friday, Emma tried again. She called, then texted when I didn't answer. You've made things so uncomfortable. He's barely talking to me. He said you carry yourself differently, that you're grounded, that he didn't expect that. I don't know what you said to him, but this is all falling apart. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because for once, I wasn't the one doing the explaining. I had said nothing. I didn't have to. Daniel had met me, really met me, and the contrast had done all the talking. That weekend, I received a voicemail from my father. It started simple. Your mother's worried. Emma's a wreck. Can you at least clear the air before the wedding? He paused, then added, It's not a good look, Avery. For you to hold a grudge like this, it's family. Family. That word used to mean something to me. Now it sounded like a label people used when they wanted a favor without earning respect. Sunday. I received an email from Daniel. It was short, polite, cautious. Subject, Helion onboarding Avery. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'll complete the week's paperwork by end of day Monday. Also, I'd appreciate the chance to schedule a one-on-one meeting when you're available. Best. Daniel, I stared at it for a long time. He wasn't just writing to an executive anymore. He was writing to someone he now had to reckon with, not just professionally, but emotionally. Not because I'd done anything to him, but because he had built a relationship on one version of the truth, and now had to ask himself what he missed, and why. The wedding week arrived like a storm front, quiet at first, but carrying weight behind every cloud. I hadn't been formally invited. Not through a card, not even through a group message. But on Tuesday, 3 days before the ceremony, I got a call from my mother. Avery, she began, her voice overly cheerful. Emma was thinking it might be nice if you came to the wedding after all. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that just a week ago I had been considered a liability to the guest list. I let the silence linger until she added, It's not too late. We'll make space. Just, dress modestly. It's going to be very classy, and Daniel's family will be there. Dress modestly. We'll make space. Like they were squeezing me into a corner of an event I should have always belonged to. I responded with a calm, measured tone. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I wasn't planning on attending. She stumbled for a second. It's not that we didn't want you there. It's just, things got busy. You know how Emma is. I didn't reply. And honestly, she continued, it would mean a lot to your father. And to Emma, too. She just hasn't known how to handle everything lately. I almost asked handle what exactly? The reality that I wasn't who they thought I was, or that I no longer needed them to see me? But I didn't. I just said I'd think about it. That night, Emma texted me directly. I know this has all been weird, but I'd really like it if you came. We're sisters. And Daniel says he respects you. I don't want any bad energy between us that day. Please, just be normal. Don't make a scene. There it was. The real concern. They didn't want me there because they missed me. They wanted me there as long as I didn't challenge the image they were selling, as long as I didn't remind people of the truth they'd spent years ignoring. On Thursday evening, less than 48 hours before the wedding, Daniel showed up at my office. He wasn't scheduled. He just knocked on the door, quietly, respectfully. I gestured for him to come in. He sat across from me, less confident now, more thoughtful. I didn't know, he said, almost in a whisper. When Emma talked about you, it was always vague. Like you were. Distant. A little odd. Smart, but... He stopped himself. But not impressive, I offered, my tone neutral. He nodded, hesitating. I guess I let her shape the image. I never asked. And now? He looked at me for a long moment. Now I feel like I've been dating someone who edited out a whole person from her life. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply said, people do that when they're afraid the truth might outshine the performance. He exhaled slowly. I just wanted to say. He paused again. Thank you for not throwing it in my face. I nodded. That's not how I operate, Daniel. He stood to leave, then turned back. If you do come to the wedding, don't come for them. Come because you want to, because you deserve to. And then he was gone. Friday. The rehearsal dinner. I wasn't invited. But I heard from Leah that tensions were high. Emma had been irritable. Daniel had been quiet. My father was pacing and concerned about appearances. That night, another message came in from Emma. The ceremony's at 12. We saved you a seat second row. On the end. Just, please be early. And don't make this about you. I stared at the screen. The same fingers that used to tap out quiet reminders to pay their internet bill now hovered over the keyboard with complete stillness. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to ask, what would happen if just once I made it about me? Saturday, 1:47 p.m. I sat in my car just outside the venue. The parking lot was half full, filled with elegant vehicles and guests in designer dresses. Everyone was already inside. The invitation had never officially come, but my presence had been approved. With conditions: sit quietly, smile politely, stay in the background like always. For a moment, I considered driving away, but Daniel's words echoed in my head. Don't come for them. Come because you want to, because you deserve to. So I stepped out of the car. The air was cool, late spring filtering through with a breeze that felt like it carried 1,000 unsaid things. I walked calmly toward the entrance, heels clicking softly on the stone. No one greeted me. Inside, the ceremony had already begun. I found my seat second row on the end, exactly where Emma had instructed. The music played, the crowd turned, and the doors opened. Emma walked down the aisle looking radiant, and yet, I noticed something in her eyes. A flicker. The smile was poised, practiced. But behind it, something was unsteady. She saw me. Just a second, our eyes met. Her posture shifted ever so slightly. Her pace slowed for half a beat. Then she looked away quickly, almost guiltily. The ceremony continued, perfectly rehearsed. The officiant spoke in a warm, polished tone about partnership, honesty, trust. I studied Daniel's face as he listened. He wasn't smiling. He stood there, next to a woman he was supposed to marry, while every line spoken about commitment and truth landed heavier than it should have. When it was his turn to speak, he hesitated. A long pause. The audience began to shift uncomfortably. Then, softly, he said, "Before I read these vows, I'd like to say something." Emma stiffened. Daniel turned to the crowd, his voice even but resolute. Over the past few weeks, I've learned more about what it means to truly see someone, not through assumptions, not through someone else's version, but through presence. How they carry themselves, how they treat people, how they lead. There was a ripple of confusion in the room. He looked directly at me. "Avery Warren," he said clearly. "My boss, my mentor, and the sister of the woman I was planning to marry." A collective gasp swept through the pews. Emma turned, her face pale. I didn't know who she was when I joined Helion. I didn't know the role she held. But more than that, I didn't know how badly she'd been erased from her own story. His voice never wavered. "This week has made me realize something. If you want a marriage built on honesty, you can't start it by hiding the truth or by pretending someone else's light dims yours." Emma reached out to touch his arm. He stepped slightly away. "I can't go forward with this," he said quietly. "Not until I understand who I am, and not while I'm still trying to pretend I didn't see what I've seen." And just like that, the performance ended. I didn't say a word. I didn't stand up, didn't deliver a dramatic monologue, didn't gloat or cry or call attention to myself. I simply sat there, still and composed, as the illusion shattered around them. Guests began whispering. The officiant stepped back. Emma's mother-in-law looked stunned. My parents, a few rows behind me, sat frozen faces drained of color. Daniel placed the ring box gently on the table beside him and walked down the aisle alone. He didn't look back. I stood up quietly, left the venue without speaking to anyone, and stepped into the sunlight. The sky was clear now. No rain, no wind, just a strange, peaceful stillness. For the first time in my life, I hadn't been overlooked, spoken over, or asked to dim myself to keep the room comfortable. I didn't take the spotlight. The truth gave it to me. That evening, I sat at my usual spot by the window, cup of tea in hand, phone face down beside me. No texts, no missed calls, no explanations, only silence. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was earned. A week later, Daniel submitted a formal request to remain at Helian's Boston HQ, citing personal transition and professional alignment. I approved it. We never discussed the wedding. We never had to. Some things, once exposed, don't need to be repeated. They simply reshape everything that comes after. I used to think setting boundaries would make me the villain. But now I understand some people only love the version of you they can control. And when you stop shrinking, they stop recognizing you. That's not betrayal. That's growth.